Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Preface: It was early 2022 when I landed the assistant manager role at a local auto shop specializing in tires and alloy wheels for cars and trucks. The business had multiple locations across the city, owned by Tommy Richards. My direct supervisor was Mark Henderson, the store manager, who reported to the owner. Right off the bat, Mark's unprofessional attitude struck me as odd. The guy went out of his way to mock and put down the new guy me. I think he felt threatened since I consistently outsold him within just a couple of months. He'd clock out early and crack open beers while the rest of us kept working. When Mark found out I did mixed martial arts training after hours, he tried goading me into fighting him, probably just for kicks. It seemed he wanted to get under my skin and provoke me into doing something rash that had cost me the job. That hunch grew stronger with what happened next. Story. During those first few months, I noticed our daily cash intake didn't match the recorded sales and would spend extra time after closing to reconcile the numbers. Meanwhile, Mark would throw up his hands, claiming he had no clue about the discrepancies. Sometimes there'd be excess cash, other times a shortage. The numbers just didn't add up on our invoicing software. As an accounting student working on my bachelor's, I was damn sure something fishy was going on with the money handling, but given how Mark treated me, I hesitated to file a complaint, worried he'd twist it against me somehow. Boy, was I right about that. A few weeks later, Mark took some vacation time. While he was away, not only did I break my personal sales record, but, surprise, surprise, the cash matched the books every single day. No discrepancies whatsoever. I promptly reported these findings to Tommy Richards, the owner, figuring he should be in the know while I covered for Mark. Honestly, I hoped Tommy would have a chat with Mark and get to the bottom of the cash issues, but I also braced myself, knowing Mark would likely realize I ratted him out. Sure enough, soon as Mark returned, he stormed up to me, furious. "Richards told me you tried blaming me for the damn cash problems. Focus on doing your damn job right and it wouldn't happen." Well, if he insisted I do my job properly, that's exactly what I aim to do, with a vengeance. Malicious compliance mode activated. That whole week I got to work scrutinizing Mark's every transaction with customers, examining each sale invoice razor close when he stepped away. Before long, a pattern of deceit emerged. Here's how he pulled it off. Let's say a customer paid cash for something listed at $200. Mark would ring it up at a $50 discount, record just $150 in cash received, then sneakily pocket the extra $50 before we counted the drawer at night. Clever scheme, but the greedy fool couldn't keep track of his own dishonest take. That's why sometimes the till was short, other times had too much. He either skimmed too little or too much off the top each day. Armed with undeniable proof, I documented every hijacked transaction over the next few weeks. Customer names, invoice numbers, the doctored amounts, you name it. I collected it all to build an airtight case against that lying, thieving snake. In the end, Mark's excessive greed and laziness did him in. Meanwhile, I simply followed his direction, doing my job by the books, precisely as instructed. Maybe he should have been more careful what he wished for. The next one is an entitled people story. Growing up on my family's farm, I always knew I wanted to be a farmer myself one day. There's just something so rewarding about working the land, raising animals, and putting food on people's tables. When my dad decided to retire a few years back, I was more than ready to take over the operations. Things were going great at first. I woke up at the crack of dawn every morning to tend to the animals. I spent long days on the tractors and combines planting and harvesting crops. At night, I'd collapse into bed, exhausted but fulfilled. As stressful as farming can be, I wouldn't trade it for anything else. This was my life's calling. That is, until the new neighbors moved in down the road. Right from the start, it was clear they weren't exactly the country living type. I'd see them walking to get their mail, wearing fancy shoes and designer clothes that had no business being on a dirt road. They drove a sparkling clean BMW that looked like it had never gone through a car wash, let alone down miles of dusty gravel lanes. The wife's name was Linda, and she seemed friendly enough at first when she came over to introduce herself. She complimented me on how beautiful the farm looked. I thanked her and mentioned that it had been in my family for over 50 years. I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. Just a few weeks later, I got an angry phone call from Linda one morning. She demanded that I stop running my disgusting, noisy farm because it was disturbing her beauty sleep. I politely explained that the rooster crowing and cows mooing were just part of living in an agricultural area. I even offered to show her and her husband around the farm someday so they could see exactly what goes into producing their food. Linda was having none of it. She informed me that I needed to find another line of work immediately because they shouldn't have to deal with these intolerable conditions. I tried to reason with her again, but she hung up on me. From there, things only got worse. Linda and her husband began filing noise complaints against my farm nearly every day with the county sheriff's office. They claimed that the smells and sounds were excessive and preventing them from enjoying their home. Of course, all the complaints were bogus. First of all, there are no laws or regulations about farming noises or smells here. I wasn't doing anything illegal. Secondly, their house was a good half-mile from my property line. There was no way the normal noises and odors from my fields could reach them at that distance. Nonetheless, I still had sheriff's deputies showing up at all hours to investigate the complaints. They'd drive around my fields, disturbing the animals and disrupting my work for no good reason other than to appease these unreasonable people. I tried explaining the situation to the cops, but most of them didn't seem to care or even believe me. In their eyes, I was just some hick farmer, while Linda and her husband were respected members of the community. After weeks of this harassment, I finally reached my breaking point. I arrived at the farm one morning to find 2 patrol cars parked outside my barn. 4 deputies were walking around inside, poking their noses into everything. My prize-winning dairy cow, Betsy, was so spooked that she kicked over a bucket of milk in her panic. I rushed over and demanded to know what was going on. One of the deputies, clearly new on the job, stammered that they were following up on a report about mistreated animals. That's when I absolutely lost it. "How dare you trespass on my property and upset my livestock over these bogus complaints?" I yelled. "You have no right to be here unless you have a warrant. Now get out before you do any more damage." The young deputy's face turned red with embarrassment. The older cops looked annoyed that I had called them out. They tried to say they were just doing their jobs, but I stood my ground. Finally, they packed up their cars and left, but not before threatening me with consequences for being uncooperative. As soon as they were gone, I called my lawyer and told him the whole ugly story. He was outraged on my behalf and said we were going to the sheriff's office that very day to file formal complaints. I met my attorney down at the station along with a few of my neighboring farmers who had witnessed the harassment. We sat down in the sheriff's office and didn't mince words describing the awful treatment I had received. My lawyer produced stacks of paperwork showing that all my operations were 100% legal and above board. By the end, the sheriff was spewing apologies and promised to retrain his whole staff on dealing with farming properties appropriately. He also assured us that no deputy would be allowed on my land again without a legal warrant. As satisfying as the public apologies were, I decided to take things one step further. With my lawyer's help, I filed a lawsuit against Linda and her husband for harassment, defamation, and interfering with my business. Dragging them to court felt so good after everything they put me through. During the hearings, they tried to play the victim and claim they were just concerned citizens reporting issues. But the judge saw right through them when my lawyer presented evidence of their malicious, targeted complaints. In the end, the judge not only dismissed their case entirely, but he awarded me a hefty settlement to cover my court fees and lost income from their interference. Let's just say Linda and her fancy husband moved away very quickly once news of their defeat spread through town. I wish I could say this experience didn't affect me at all. But the truth is, it shook my faith in our justice system for a while. I never thought the police could be weaponized so easily against innocent farmers like myself. However, the apology from the sheriff's office and the outcome of the lawsuit restored some of my trust. At the end of the day, I know I'm doing good, honest work producing food and caring for the land. Now, thanks to the support of my neighbors and lawyer, I can get back to farming in peace. The cows and chickens don't care who lives down the road, as long as I keep showing up every morning to tend to their needs, and that's exactly what I plan to do. The next one is a petty revenge story. Context. My ex and I dated for 4 years. We had given each other promise rings and were talking about me relocating to his city so we were pretty serious. He was on the whole a fairly sweet guy, but totally unable to deal with his negative emotions and could get very angry over small issues. One big issue I had with our relationship was how badly he would badmouth me to his friends and family who very much coddled him. He ended our relationship on text while I was thousands of miles away from home for work. I'm a consultant engineer. He ended it because he hadn't actually gotten over the argument we'd had a week prior. I suspect his friends and family egged him on, after we had supposedly made up. After this, he blocked me on everything. The text was a couple of lines long and with little to no actual explanation. Why I wanted revenge. For weeks, I spent my time mourning the end of my relationship, going to therapy and trying to healthily process my emotions. One night, my feelings got the better of me and I drunk dialed him. He was furious, called me crazy, said all his friends and family thought I was crazy and that he owed me nothing. There I was trying to forgive him for the pain he'd caused me, and all the while he was seething and bad-mouthing me. So I decided, for once, I'm not going to be the bigger person the revenge. I religiously journal, and in our 4-year relationship had managed to fill 5 journals which describe everything in great detail. So I pulled from them all the nasty things he'd said to me, verbatim, along with corresponding dates and a description for context, and created a spreadsheet on Excel to send this information via SMS and email to all his friends and family. Some of my favorites quotes, "You fucking posh bitch," for showing up just in time to take him to his birthday meal at a fancy restaurant, rather than a few hours earlier. I had been bedridden and unwell for 6 days, and was only just well enough to leave the house. "You selfish bitch, this affects me more," when I said I was hesitant to report being assaulted as the only evidence I had was my word. "You don't know what it feels like to hit rock bottom," in reference to his on and off issue with alcoholism while I was trying to confide in him about the sadness I felt about my father's passing. Also lots of references to him drinking, as he tells his family he doesn't drink. I guess they know now. Call me crazy? Okay, then fair enough, I will be, ha ha. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So when I was a wee superb raccoon, but still superb, I was in the Navy. Recently 21, we decided to go to a bar that had a decent local cover band, so we show up and I present my ID. Grant you, clean cut and close shaved. I did not look 21, but my out-of-state ID was no good and all I had was my military ID. Dorman decides he can fuck with me. This is fake. I am keeping it. My eyes bugged out. "Dude, that is a military ID. Give it back." "Nope, mine now. $20 bucks or fuck off." "I can't get back on base without it," I said. "Then you better cough up $20 or fuck off." "Oh, I see. This is a shakedown. Fuck off, huh? Okay. Cue malicious compliance. Buddy who drove and used state ID drove us back. We go into the officer of the day's office to report my lost and stolen ID. OOD is a crusty old bastard, but fair. Actually a Mustang. He takes orders from the president and God, and we are not sure of the president. He might tell him to fuck off if it is a stupid idea. He listens. My buddy backs my story. His eyes narrow in an evil, evil way. "Chief, can you come up here? I got a present for you." I started to shake a little. Am I headed for a few days in the brig for losing my ID? Fuck. There goes any chance of a bump to E4. Seaman Raccoon here says the doorman at Joe's took his ID and wants $20. Pull a driver and one of those jarheads at the gate and go down there and sort it out. The chief looks at me like fresh meat. "Come on, you two. We are going for a ride." So we all pile in the van with a couple of Marines in BDU and sidearms. It is quiet on the way there. Chief don't look too happy. Can't believe I got to deal with this shit. Well, at least I don't have to sit at the desk all night. So we roll up. Place is pretty packed. Doormen don't look so tough as the chief stalks up to him like a storm cloud spitting lightning and 2 armed Marines flanking him. I am hanging back. "Raccoon, this the guy with your ID?" "Yes, Chief." Chief gets up toe-to-toe with him. Chief is short and wide, but is built like a brick wall. Jim Muscle Doorman takes a step back, but dude has nowhere to go in the little entranceway. "Give me his ID now, or I will start looking for it myself." ID is produced. Handed to me. Doorman ignored. Chief pulls the door open, looks at the room, motions for the Marines to make a hole to the bar, make it wide. They do so, calmly shouting to move people out of the way as the music and talk dies down. Chief grabs a chair, stands on it, then uses his parade ground voice. "All active duty military. This site is now on the prohibited list. Pay your tab and get out." He gets down, walks out with Marines tailing him. And half the bar follows them out. Very few are active duty this far from base, but many are reserve or retired. They don't like shit like this either. Place went on the list and was still there when I transferred out 6M or so later. Yep. I ducked off. Hard and fast. The next one is an entitled people story. Maybe I'm the entitled person here, but I think I deserve to be treated with some decency. Treated like a human with some basic kindness, dignity, and respect. I am homeless, and I have a story. About a week ago, I burned my hand somewhat badly. It was my own dumb mistake. I have a small camp stove I use for cooking, and I had just finished with it. My dumbass took my food off, turned it off, and grabbed it to put away. I literally grabbed the metal part the pan rests on, forgetting metal plus fire equals sign hot. I did everything I could to take care of it. I washed my hands a lot. I kept cleaning it off with isopropyl alcohol and polysporin to help it heal. But my best efforts weren't enough. I developed an infection, and I knew I needed treatment. Instead of going to the emergency room, I found a walk-in clinic. I waited my turn to see the doctor, and when I finally got in to explain what I needed, he basically refused to help me. He said he wouldn't be prescribing anything and I'd just have to deal with the pain, accusing me of intentionally burning myself for drugs. I tried to say I just needed antibiotics because my hand was infected. Well, I got nothing, and I knew the infection was bad. I was unable to close my hand. It was getting very swollen. Just an FYI, I don't drink, I don't use drugs, I'm on the straight and narrow path. So I left, and it was off to the emergency room because I needed treatment. I went and explained to the ER nurse what happened, that I think I need antibiotics, and was put in the waiting room for 6 hours. Finally, I was taken back into a smaller waiting room where I waited for another 3 hours. Finally, a doctor came, but what bothered me was he had 2 very large security guards behind him. The doctor didn't ask me what's wrong. He immediately said, "Unfortunately, we can't prescribe you any medication," and basically tried to usher me out of the door. Duck, yeah. I know I look rough, but I'm not a tweaker, and I kinda got really mad and raised my voice. I said very sternly, "I don't want your ducking drugs, I want ducking treatment." I slammed my hand very hard down on the metal table thing they have in the rooms and said, "I have an infection." I burned myself on my camp stove. I have my stove in my bag. You can see little burned pieces of my flesh still on it. I just need you to take a look, Marie. Give me some antibiotics because I don't want to have to cosplay as Captain Ducking Hook for the rest of my life. Me slamming my hand on the table alerted the security. They said if I have another outburst like that, they're going to hold me and get the police involved. Luckily, the doctor finally got it through his head I wasn't a junkie and took a look at my hand. He ended up giving me a needle in my hand because it was very infected, as well as a blister pack of antibiotics, enough for 7 days. He said if it's not better in a week to come back. But seriously, am I being entitled? Do I not have the right to be treated like a human? Okay, and my hand is feeling a lot better. The swelling has gone down. The next one is an entitled parent story. A few years ago, I lived in a house that was a block away from a public park. It was a very large park, and I noticed 2 soccer games occurring when I left one Saturday to go to the grocery store. When I returned home about 45 minutes later, I noticed there was a truck parked beside my property. The occupants of that truck were on my property. There was 2 children dressed in soccer uniforms, their mom and dad, and a large Doberman. The Doberman was lying on a picnic blanket, the parents were setting up their family's picnic lunch, and the children were chasing each other, all on my front lawn. I couldn't believe my eyes. I pulled my car into my driveway and walked over to the family asking them why were they on my property. The entitled mother then snarked at me, "What does it look like? We are eating lunch." I asked, "Why are they not eating in the public park that is a block away?" And she responded, "It's more peaceful here." In complete shock, I then said, "This is private property, and you all need to leave now." The mother's response was, "Go duck yourself, you little idiot." I was furious. I pay the mortgage, I do all the lawn work, and you think it's okay to trespass and tell me where to go on my own property? So this was the easiest revenge ever. I walked right beside them to the outside tap that was attached to my sprinkler system and turned it on. The family started screaming and grabbed all their stuff as they ran to their truck. The mother and father screamed obscenities the whole time and said that they were going to get me. Well, this is where revenge number 2 came in. I downloaded my security camera footage, which showed their license plate, and brought it to my next-door neighbor who just happened to be a police officer who working that day. The parents were charged with trespassing, and I had a smile on my face for the rest of the day. The next one is an entitled people story. A revenge story told by my best friend. He was bullied a lot as a kid. My friend was a Boy Scout, but of course there was a bully there as well, making his life miserable. When my friend was 9 to 10 years old, the Boy Scouts went on a weekend hike. They slept at a farm, all of them in the same room. The farm had a lot of apple trees. The fruit was ripe. The farmer told them to eat all the fruit they wanted. And so they did. Eating big amounts of apples has some strange effects. It is one of the few substances known to man that goes straight from the solid form to gas. When evening came, the farting started. Regarding boys' humor, nothing beats a good fart. So they had a lot of fun. My friend was very tired and was the first one to fall asleep in his sleeping bag. He suddenly woke up and looked up in an area of the human body that never sees the light of sun. The bully, of course, squatting over him and farting him straight in the face. The other boys thought it was hilarious and were howling with laughter. For my friend, this was the last drop. After a while, he pretended to fall back asleep. When everyone was fast asleep, he stood up and went over to the bully. He had his naked ass hovering an inch or 2 over the bully's nose, and then he fired the big cannon. He told me that if it had been a farting competition, he would have secured the gold medal for sure. The effect was instant. The sounds from the bully were a mix of screams and puking noises. He panicked and got stuck in his sleeping bag. Then, someone turned on the lights. It turned out that the fart was not entirely in gas form as intended. The horrified face of the bully had got a lot of instant freckles, and some in his mouth as well. He tried to bully my friend a few times after, but just whispering freckles was an instant mute. The next story is entitled Neighbor Chopped Down a Tree on My Property to Destroy My Pool Because I Refused to Let Her Access My Pool. I had always dreamed of having a beautiful home, complete with a stunning pool in the backyard. When I finally found the perfect house on a quiet street, I was thrilled. It was everything I had ever wanted, and I couldn't wait to spend my weekends lounging by the pool, sipping a cold drink, and soaking up the sun. However, my excitement was short-lived when I met my neighbor Karen. From the moment I met her, I knew she was going to be trouble. She was a middle-aged woman with short, choppy hair, who seemed to enjoy nothing more than making other people's lives miserable. She was loud, brash, and had a sharp tongue that could cut through steel. I quickly learned that Karen was an entitled woman who believed that she was entitled to anything she wanted, whenever she wanted it. At first, I didn't mind Karen using my pool occasionally, but soon it became a daily occurrence. Karen would show up with her 2 unruly children, expecting me to supervise them while they splashed around in the pool. Her kids would break things, eat all my food, and leave a mess everywhere they went. I tried talking to Karen about it, but she just laughed it off and continued to use my pool without permission. Eventually, I had enough and told Karen that she and her children were no longer welcome to use my pool. Karen didn't take it well and began harassing me, showing up at my doorstep every day, demanding access to my pool. She even went as far as to sneak into my backyard when I wasn't home. It was clear that she wasn't going to give up easily. One morning I woke up to find that my house had been vandalized. The windows were broken and the walls were covered in graffiti. I knew instantly that Karen was behind it. She had gone too far this time, and I was determined to put a stop to her behavior. I called the police and filed a report, but Karen denied any involvement. The situation escalated, and I ended up having to take her to court. It was a stressful and expensive process, but in the end I won the case and was awarded damages for the repairs to my house. Karen was forced to pay me a substantial amount of money, and she was also banned from coming within 500 feet of my property. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't one to give up easily. While I was away on a work trip, Karen hired an illegal contractor to chop down the beautiful oak tree in my backyard, hoping it would fall onto my pool and destroy it. I was devastated when I came back to find my tree gone and my pool damaged. I was angry, but I knew what I had to do. I took Karen back to court, and this time I wasn't holding back. I sued her for everything she was worth, and she was forced to declare bankruptcy. Karen lost everything, and everyone in the neighborhood knew what she had done. For a while, things were quiet. I thought that Karen had finally learned her lesson and would leave me alone. But one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a photo album filled with pictures of me and my family taken in our backyard. At first, I thought it was a gift from a friend, but then I noticed the note attached to it. It was from Karen, and the note read, "I'm watching you." I was terrified. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do unless Karen threatened me directly. I lived in constant fear, never knowing when Karen was going to strike again. One night, I heard a loud banging on my front door. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was Karen or just some kids playing a prank, but the banging grew louder and more persistent, so I slowly made my way to the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Karen standing outside, a wild look in her eyes. "Open up!" she screamed, pounding on the door. "I know you're in there!" I froze, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to let her in, but I also didn't want to provoke her any further. Before I could make a decision, the door suddenly burst open and Karen came charging inside. I stumbled backward, trying to get away from her, but she was too fast. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, her fingers digging into my flesh. "You think you can just take what's mine?" she screamed, her face twisted with anger. "You think you're better than me? I'll show you who's boss." I tried to fight her off, but she was too strong. She pushed me to the ground and began kicking me, her feet connecting with my ribs and my stomach. I curled up in a ball, trying to protect myself, but the blows kept coming. It felt like it went on forever. But eventually Karen stopped and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I lay there for a long time, gasping for breath and trying to process what had just happened. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I couldn't live in fear anymore. I had to stand up to Karen and make sure she couldn't hurt me or anyone else ever again. I decided to hire a private investigator to look into Karen's background and find out what she was capable of. It was a risky move, but I knew I had to do something to protect myself. The investigator came back with some shocking information. Karen had a history of violence and had been arrested several times for assault and battery. She had also been diagnosed with a personality disorder that made her prone to erratic behavior and extreme mood swings. With this information in hand, I went back to court and filed for a restraining order against Karen. This time, the judge didn't hesitate to grant it, and Karen was forced to stay away from me and my property. She was also required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and attend anger management classes. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't done yet. A few months later, I received a call from one of my neighbors informing me that Karen had been arrested for breaking into my house and stealing some of my belongings. She had apparently gone on a rampage, smashing things and screaming obscenities before the police arrived and took her away. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness when I heard the news. Part of me was glad that Karen was finally behind bars where she couldn't hurt anyone else. But another part of me felt sorry for her, knowing that she was clearly suffering from some serious mental health issues that had gone untreated for far too long. In the end, I decided to sell my house and move away from the neighborhood. I couldn't bear to stay in a place that held so many bad memories for me. But I also knew that I had learned a valuable lesson through this experience, that no matter how beautiful a house may be, it's the people who live in it that truly matter.
The next story is titled, Since We're Talking About Cutting in Line. When I was barely into my teens, I went to the fair with my dad and brother. There was a popular ride. We were in line and almost at the entrance. Some lady and her husband pushed their 2 sons in line in front of us. The poor kids were like, okay, and looked somewhat ashamed. So then, when they turn away, my dad tells us to walk in front of them. We did. Then we could hear the lady yell at her kids in Takahe, "Pay attention. They're stealing your spot in line." My dad said, "What's wrong with her? I can't believe she wants to raise her kids like that." And we kept going. The kids knew that what they did was wrong. The dad was just lost in oblivion, and the mom was mad. The next story is titled, I Destroyed My Family Friend's Business and Credibility. The background. A few years after I started university, a friend of my mother's, who we will call Cook, started what can be generously called a restaurant in a small town a couple hours outside of the city we lived in. It was really a glorified hot dog stand and a golf course. My mother had invested money into the business, so she had a small personal stake in ensuring its success. That meant that she would often enlist us, aka my brother and I, to waiter when she could not do it herself. And my brother hated this guy, though I don't blame him. Cook had no idea how to run a business, and he was completely uninterested in learning. He was also completely computer illiterate, and had me set up the Google account for his business. And in order to get us to work in his business, he would pick one of us up from our home, drive us 2 hours or so out of town, and we were basically stuck there until we were driven back due to the fact that neither of us had a driver's license. And since my brother had problems with this guy, legit concerns that were brushed off as him having a bad attitude, I was the one who more often than not had to spend 2 to 10 days at a time there, stuck in a barely livable house until I was laid back home. My mother was no better. C, manage a business at all. D, utilize my brother and I in the most effective way, considering my brother had already graduated from university, and I was working towards a double major in business. Furthermore, they were completely unprofessional. They would host shouting matches in Chinese for customers to hear, and the kitchen was filthy despite Cook's insistence that the kitchen was the cleanest place in a restaurant. Yeah, right. An ice rink was less slippery than the ground in there, and he would routinely touch cooked food after handling raw meat. And I distinctly remember sweeping up what I thought was a green bell pepper, only to realize it was a moldy onion ring. Even the stove area was dripping grease. Literally, a big-ass drop landed on my arm one time. They could not train staff at all. They had hired 5 people in the first year, and none of them came back the next. Cook, in particular, was especially two-faced in how he handled customers. He would smile at them and greet them, remembering details from previous conversations, and then turn to me and say in Chinese about how they're all stupid, stingy retirees with too much money and free time on their hands. All this left a great feeling of resentment for both me and my brother. Not only was it effectively trapping us to work for this completely incompetent individual, we would get basically nothing out of it. This was particularly frustrating for me because, as a business student at the time, I could see all the ways the place could improve. I even offered to write up some policies, do some inventory management, and take a look at the administrative side just to help out and get some experience for myself. They kept insisting that they didn't need it. Sure, we were paid bare minimum and the guy did know how to cook, but we have to bear with the brunt of their frustration while hiding the fact that we were sick of helping out. Until we couldn't anymore. The incident. Last year, I graduated from university. It wasn't as happy of a time as it should have been because my grandpa passed away the week before. I couldn't even celebrate the night before I walked the stage because A, I had to give part of the eulogy the previous day, and B, I had to mediate an incident between my brother, my mother, and Cook because my mother couldn't. No pre-graduation shots for me because I was stuck on the phone for 3 hours listening to how insensitive Cook was over the fact that my grandpa just passed away. But I figured that once I walked the stage and I had my diploma, I could spend that next week job hunting. No dice. Immediately after I graduated on the Monday afterwards, my mother voluntold me that I had to work 10 days in the Hellstraunt. I lasted 6 before it happened. By all accounts, it wasn't that busy of a day to start off with. There was a breakfast brunch for Father's Day that barely anyone attended, and most people that did show up wanted to order off the menu. But both Cook and my mother were incredibly stressed out, and both of them were taking it out on me. My mother spent the day micromanaging me and finding flaws in every little thing I did, like cleaning an empty table over clearing plates from a table out on the deck, to not immediately refilling coffee or water when a glass or mug was half full, to not table touching every 5 minutes. Cook just shouted a lot and gave contradictory orders every 2 minutes. But it was the combination of my mother and Cook screaming at me for a mistake I didn't even make, something about a sauce that a customer requested but they got mad about, refusing to listen to me, literally shutting me down when I opened my mouth, and Cook mocking me for breaking down in tears. I remember him saying, "You're 25, you should know better than to cry over a stupid mistake," made me realize that not only could I not handle it anymore, but I wanted to burn the place to the ground. I booked a flight out of the province that day and left a week later. I didn't even tell my mother when or why I left. The revenge. Remember how I said that not only were they completely unprofessional, but also completely computer illiterate? See, despite the fact that I was no longer in the province, I still had all the login information for the business. Furthermore, because I knew all the laws that he blatantly refused to learn, I knew all the violations that he had committed in the business. For the first part of my revenge, I signed out his computer from the Google account. I don't think it was really necessary since he never used that computer in the first place for anything other than porn, but I want to make sure that he and my mother wouldn't be able to stop me. Before I left the province, I claimed the business in review sites using the email and the business phone number. Then, I blasted every single review, positive or negative, with all the crap he used to say about customers. Any negative review was immediately mocked. Any positive review was left with a note of "thank you, you cheap bee." Any questions were met with hostility, and it basically boiled down to "I'm right, you're wrong." I also make mentions about how he didn't wash his hands in the kitchen, and the stuff they're yelling in Chinese are insults about uppity customers. Given that it was a tourist-based town, I'm fairly certain that deep dip of sales that my brother mentioned later on was because of all those. And no one suspected a thing because my mother and Cook didn't know how to work the internets, and my brother didn't care enough to look up the business. Next, I meticulously documented all the complaints that I had between my brother and myself, as well as the ones from the few people Cook had hired but never kept because he could not train them. I reported the 2 times that I slipped in his kitchen, incidents where he refused to wash his hands in between handling salad and raw meat because it took too long, and I handed those off to the Health Services Department. I also anonymously informed the Tax Revenue Agency that he was severely underreporting income, as employees were instructed only to write down the credit-debit receipts to report in sales. The third part of my revenge wasn't really my part, to be honest. Rather, it was because of his own incompetence. As I said before, he was completely computer illiterate. I didn't even have to lock out the person he hired to do accounting because he didn't bother reporting his expenses except hand them a garbage bag full of receipts. To be honest, I felt kinda sorry for them, but because their hands were tied, they couldn't dispute any of the claims that I made. What I did do, however, was text them all the things that my mother and Cook said about them so that they wouldn't bother trying to defend his ass. They quit a month before the crap hit the fan, meaning that Cook was left holding the bag. So naturally, given that the business wasn't making near as much money to make rent, let alone pay off all the fines that he was slapped down with, the government repossessed everything. From everything in the dinky little house that he was renting for business purposes to every single fork and knife he bought. Because of all the health code violations, he couldn't find a job as a cook again, which was his only job for about 30 years. And because the tax revenue agency knew how bad he was with managing businesses, they naturally denied him when he requested a permit to open up a growing operation. As far as I know, he's no longer in contact with my family, but his brother-in-law, who is my mom's hairstylist, mentioned that he had to move somewhere else to get away from all the bad reputation. My mother mostly got off scot-free because all of the business permits and licenses were under his name, but she lost quite a lot of money, and last I heard, my family had to move into a smaller house. And no one knew that I was the one who was doing it. My brother suspected, as he relayed details of what had happened to me, but I never confirmed it. Not that he would tell my parents, because honestly, duck that hellstrom. As for me, I'd like to say that everything's sunshine and roses, but my decision to impulsively move provinces had its ups and downs. I did manage to find a place to live and a place to work, so at least I'm alive. It's hard, but I'd rather be doing this than going back. The next story is titled, "Wanna Have Parties While I'm Away? Guess you get what you get." So, this was back in 2007, 2008 or so. I had been living in an apartment with a roommate that turned out to be a raging alcoholic. Things mostly weren't bad, and we both had friends over and couch surfers and the like. Well, our apartment wasn't in the greatest of shape. Some airsoft divots in the walls from a few a-hole friends, carpets stained and dirty, but they were old when we moved in, etc. But nothing that wasn't repairable. It comes to move out, we have a few weeks left, and I'm at the apartment maybe 3 or 4 days out of the week and spending the others at my grandparents' house. I got sent to work at a secondary work location, and that made more sense than driving 45 minutes each way. So, in my time at the apartment, I'm spending time packing everything I own into my little 90s Mazda Protege, getting ready to move to AZ and dealing with vacation time and transferring outside my district for work. On top of all that, I'm spending a ton of time cleaning, patching holes, etc. I leave for a few days and come back to an empty apartment. There are bags full of empty bottles and cans in the kitchen, nearly waist deep, and a beautiful hole punched in the wall near the bathroom stuffed with bendy straws. So, I take care of all that, get the stuff to patch the hole, and then leave for a few more days of work, knowing that I would have to be back for the walkthrough inspection. The day after my last work day, I had messaged my roommate and told him he needed to get color match paint and paint over the repairs that I did to the hole, and he didn't do it. So, I show up at the apartment with a couple hours to go until the walkthrough in order to polish up on any little things, only to find he never painted the one thing I asked him to do, and it's not done. So, I run to Ace, get the paint over, and open all the windows so the smell can dissipate. Then, the walkthrough happens, and they say that they can smell the fresh paint, but can't tell where it is, so I must have done one heck of a repair job. Damn right. Cue petty revenge. When we got the deposit back, it was sent to me, and since I had to spend so much time and effort cleaning and repairing the apartment and didn't get any help in return, I instead told my roommate that they charged us for the carpets and pocketed that money instead. Wasn't a lot of money, probably about half what I would have been paid as a handyman doing the same repair work.
The next one is an entitled people story. If you've read my previous posts, you'll know I usually have issues with the mother folks. This time, I'll give you in all the glory the biggest fool I ever had to deal with in my business of owning a comic store and selling from flea markets. The year was 1995 or 1996. 2 kids, about 12 or 13, walked into my store and wanted to buy a pack of Upper Deck SPX basketball. For those of you who do not know, there was 1 card per pack, and it was a hologram card except for some inserts. The kid paid $5, and he selected a pack and opened it. It didn't look like a regular card, and we were confused about what it may be. I asked to see it and saw that it was an Anthony Hardaway rookie autograph redemption card. To get it, you had to mail this into Upper Deck, and they sent you an autographed card. The kid asked what the value was, and I pulled out my Beckett's price guide and looked it up. No online sites then. According to the guide, it had a value of $500. Needless to say, this kid was jumping up and down with joy, and his friend was excited too. Enter Idiot Father. Idiot Father saw his happy kid and looked annoyed. He asked what was going on. The kid told him he got a $500 card. I confirmed this, and he asked how much he paid for the pack. When the kid told him, he got mad that he wasted $5 on a goddamn pack of cards. I told the kid what had to be done to get the card, and Father was upset that he had to mail something. His reasoning was that they would know where he lived. I told him that this was normal, and it was just to send his son the card. Nope, not having it. I said to him, tell you what, I'll mail it for you and your address will not be known by Upper Deck. I'll give you a receipt and I'll give you a call when it comes in. He didn't want to do that because I'd have his number. I said, sir, I don't want to hang with you. All I want is for your son to get his card. I then said that I'll give you the receipt for the card and you can come in and pick it up in about 30 days as I would mail it out tomorrow. Nope. I would just tell him that I never got it and sell it and rip him off. I said, okay, how about I give you $100 for it right now, and you don't have to do anything? Nope, it was worth $500, and I was ripping him off. He then told the kid that he wasn't smart enough to buy anything because he was being robbed and was an idiot for not realizing it. I tried one last time. I showed him the expiration date, which was in about 2 months, and said that since he had no interest in mailing it in or selling it, he would not be getting anything for it as it would become worthless after that date. Well, he dragged the kid out while insulting the kid and myself, leaving his friend behind to fend for himself. Several months go by, and I never heard if the kid got the card or not. One day I decided to go to the supermarket in the strip mall I was located in and saw the kid with his mother. I asked him if he ever got the card, and he said no. His mother asked, "What card?" and the kid said nothing. She asked again, and he muttered that he got a good card, and his father wouldn't let him send away for it. He told her what it was worth, and that I offered to buy it, and she got pissed. A few seconds later, here comes idiot father, and he sees me talking to them. She asks him about the card, and he started stammering that I was trying to rip them off and tried to get their address, and that the whole thing was a scam. The look in her eyes could melt the polar caps. She said, "I work 3 jobs, and you sit on your ass all day and you turn down an easy $100 because you're so effing paranoid that you refuse to believe anything?" She asked her son what happened to the card, and the kid told her that the moron ripped it up and threw it out the window of the car. She turns to him and tells him he's walking home because she didn't want to be in the same car with him. Found out it was a 7-mile walk. It was December. I don't know what happened after that, as the kid's friend told me they moved soon after. In my opinion, this story is a great example of how an adult's actions can have negative consequences for a child. It's sad to think that the kid missed out on a potentially valuable card because of his father's paranoia and refusal to follow through with a simple process. It's also heartening to see the mother standing up for her child and taking action against the father's behavior. Overall, it's an interesting and thought-provoking story about the importance of following through on opportunities and not letting fear or mistrust get in the way. The next story is titled, Criminal Karen Tows Unmarked Police Car After They Block Her Property. As a resident of a rural area in the Czech Republic, I had always been accustomed to the peace and quiet that came with living in such an area. However, my peaceful existence was disrupted when a couple, whom I will refer to as Karen and her boyfriend, moved in next door. They were the complete opposite of what one would expect from someone living in the countryside, and it wasn't long before I realized they were up to no good. Karen and her boyfriend were notorious for their loud music, constant screaming, and general disregard for the appearance of their property. It was a total mess, and it wasn't long before it started to attract all sorts of animals. The smell that emanated from their yard was simply unbearable, and I had to keep my windows shut at all times to avoid the stench. I had always tried to keep to myself and avoid confrontations with my neighbors, but Karen made it almost impossible. She had a bad attitude and would always try to start fights with me for no reason. I tried to talk to her on several occasions, but it always ended with her threatening me or throwing garbage at me. One day, as I was returning home from a walk, I noticed several people entering Karen's house, and I realized they were there to buy drugs. I knew it was time to do something about it, but I was hesitant because I knew that Karen and her boyfriend were dangerous. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to call the police. I informed them that my neighbors were cooking and selling meth, and they promised to send someone over as soon as possible. It was a rural area, so it took a while before the police showed up. When the police finally arrived, they parked their unmarked car in front of Karen's house, and that's when things started to get ugly. Karen flew into a rage and threatened to tow the police car because it was blocking her property. She called a tow truck, and when it arrived, the police officers rushed out to stop the driver from towing the car away. The driver argued that he had been called to tow an illegal vehicle, but the police officers quickly showed him their badges and informed him that the car was parked legally. They warned him that if he didn't put the car down immediately, they would arrest him for obstructing a police investigation. Karen continued to rant and rave, and it was clear that she was high on drugs. The police arrested her, and when they entered the house, they discovered a meth cooking operation, illegal weapons, and a ton of drugs. Her boyfriend was also arrested, and it was discovered that he had been on probation for a previous arrest. In the end, Karen and her boyfriend were charged with multiple drug-related offenses and tax fraud. The property owner, who was not Karen, sued them for damages and the cost of cleaning up the property. It was a relief to have them gone, but it was also a sobering reminder that danger could be lurking in even the most peaceful of places. Update. In the years that followed, the community came together to try to prevent anything like this from happening again. The police increased their patrols in the area, and the residents became more vigilant about reporting any suspicious activity. I heard that Karen and her boyfriend were sentenced to a lengthy prison term and would be behind bars for a long time. I also heard that the property was sold to a family who had plans to turn it into a community garden, which was a positive step towards healing and creating a safer environment for all. In my opinion, this story highlights the importance of being aware of one's surroundings and being willing to take action when necessary. It's alarming to think that dangerous criminal activity could be happening right next door without anyone knowing about it. The bravery of the protagonist in reporting Karen and her boyfriend's drug operation to the police is admirable. It's also satisfying to see justice served and the community coming together to prevent anything like this from happening again. Overall, it's a gripping and eye-opening story that serves as a reminder to always stay vigilant. The next story is titled, Neighbors Think My Life Now Revolves Around Them. So, on today's episode of What the Duck from the Neighbors, I need to have them approve when I do things that make any sort of noise. My neighbor just rang my doorbell to tell me his wife said to stop hammering. I was dumbfounded. I just kinda stared and said, "Excuse me?" And he informed me that we would be unable to make any sort of noise for the next few months because of their baby. To which I laughed in his face and closed the door. And now his wife is screaming at my door and he is messaging me to please just do what his wife says. So, some background. My spouse bought this house in 2011. Both houses are single-family detached homes. Both lots are 1.5 lots, so there is 33 feet roughly between our houses compared to the 6 feet for the rest of the street. The neighbor's husband was already in his house. I moved in 8 years ago, shortly after I saw the neighbor for the first time, and it was someone I've known since I was 4. We went to school all the way through high school together. We are 40. 3 years ago, he met someone. She had, at the time, a 2-year-old girl. She would stay at his house, and I would constantly find the kid wandering the streets. They would just send her outside with no supervision, no toys, no fenced yard, and expect her to entertain herself. The child was, and still is, nothing but a brat. 2 years ago, she moved in with her daughter. I run a daycare, so my yard is full of fun toys. But we also have 3 other fenced-off areas, one for our pool in the summer, one for our dogs, and one for our hot tub. All have separate fences and self-closing gates, plus my external fence is 650. During 2020, when COVID hit bad, the kids were doing virtual schooling from home. She never actually did it. She would be ringing my doorbell in the middle of the day, asking me to open my yard for her. I would explain that she can't be here when I have daycare kids and my daughter will come out to play after supper. She went to their backyard, dragged patio furniture to my fence, and climbed in. Who knows how long she was actually in there. But she decided she was done, and then couldn't get out. The latch for my main gate is at the very top, so the babies can't open it when my back is turned. She started screaming. I ran out in a panic, took her home, explained what happened to Mom, and Mom gave me crap for just not allowing her to play. I face a $100,000 fine if she is caught on my property during daycare hours. I explained this. She still snapped and called me an idiot. I left it at that. Happened a handful more times. I started sending them daycare invoices. Still kept happening. I finally told them I would have to call the police next time, which I did. Except this time, Mom and Grandpa were both sitting outside on the stairs and watched her do it. Also, they never bothered to come help her open the gate when she started screaming. Police gave them crap and told them to stop, or Mom would be charged with child endangering. I now have proximity sensors at the top of my fence and get a notification if anything goes over my fence. It's gotten better as she has gotten older, so last summer we set up our above-ground pool. We just ordered a new pump system and heater. The pool was half filled. I had also just done up all my planters. I casually glanced at my security cameras and saw her by the pool. I headed out. The main gate was open as the neighborhood kids were running from yard to yard playing. She took it upon herself to go to the pool and take buckets of soil from my planters and dump it into the pool. There was $400 damage to my brand new $1,000 pump heater system that was up for less than 4 hours. I snapped and screamed at her to get out of my yard and not come back. She is not allowed in my yard at all unless me or my spouse is out there. Now to current time. They had a new baby last week, and me hammering in my basement is disturbing them in their house 33 F'd away, and they expect me to wait until the fall to finish my project. So I'm currently sitting on my bench outside, enjoying a glass of water with my outdoor speakers playing metal while I mow the lawn, which is much louder than the little bit of hammering. I'll finish that tonight after dark. In my opinion, this story is a perfect example of why it's important to have good communication with your neighbors. It's unfortunate that the writer has to deal with such difficult neighbors who don't seem to understand boundaries, but it's clear that there were misunderstandings on both sides. I can see how frustrating it must be to have to constantly deal with someone else's child wandering into your yard, especially when it could potentially put you in legal trouble. At the same time, it's understandable that the neighbors would be sensitive to noise with a newborn in the house. It's a tough situation, but hopefully they can come to some kind of understanding and find a way to coexist peacefully. The next story is titled, I left a landlord and property management company at a loss because they tried to nickel and dime me. I know the title is bad, but hear me out. This happened a while ago after I relocated to a new city. I signed a new 1-year lease for a townhouse in the downtown core and really enjoyed where I lived. The townhouse was okay, but a little less nice than I anticipated during my showing. Caveat emptor, I suppose. The only other relevant background is that the lease said the security deposit would be used for the last month's rent and would not be held as a damage deposit. The year passed with very few problems. The water heater went out in the dead of winter, but I stayed in a hotel for 3 nights and offset that cost against the rent after verbally agreeing with the landlord to do so. At the end of the year, the landlord asked if I wanted to renew. I said yes. I was presented with a 1-year extension for the same rent. I signed it and sent it back. I waited about 2 weeks and hadn't received the landlord's signed version back, so I inquired with the management company. They said the landlord was mad because they didn't get rent on the first of the month most of the time. I asked what they were talking about because I always paid on or ahead of time, and they said that while I paid the management company on time, as required by the lease, the management company hadn't gotten it into the landlord's hands in time. I said that wasn't my problem per the lease, but the management company requested $100 more per month on the extension to make up for the inconvenience. They said they would send me a new lease reflecting the $100 increase, which they did. I immediately went out and found a condo in a similarly ideal location that was much nicer and rented for $75 a month less than my existing rent. I went through the background check with them and they sent me a lease to sign. Before signing the new lease, I sent a certified letter to the landlord and the management company of the old location saying my previous signature on the new lease, which had not yet been countersigned, was revoked and ineffective because of their counteroffer and no longer capable of acceptance. I then signed the new lease. At that point, I had about 10 days left on the existing lease. The management company and landlord called me freaking out because they wouldn't be able to find a new tenant in time and would lose revenue. I said, not my problem, hired a moving company, cleaned up the old place, and returned it to them in the same condition I received it. In my opinion, the story highlights the importance of carefully reading and understanding the terms of a lease agreement. It's frustrating to be nickel and dimed by a landlord or property management company, but it's equally important to stand up for one's rights as a tenant. The protagonist's decision to revoke their previous signature on the new lease and find a better deal elsewhere shows that sometimes it's necessary to take matters into one's own hands. However, leaving the old place in good condition and not causing unnecessary harm to the landlord or management company is also commendable. Overall, this story provides valuable lessons for anyone who is renting or looking to rent a property. The last story is titled, A Man Misunderstood a Flight Attendant's Directions and Felt Entitled to a Free Premium Seat because they wouldn't apologize for lying to him. This happened last night, and it was one of the most satisfying encounters I've ever had with someone who had a downright comical sense of entitlement. I took a flight from San Francisco to Boston that was in the afternoon after a full day of work. I had a $200 airline credit to use on just this one flight before I lost it at the end of the year, so I was debating between trying to drink through $200 of free booze over the 6-hour flight or upgrading my seat to the front row. In the end, I decided to go with the seat upgrade and picked the window seat in the absolute front row of the plane with a shameful amount of leg room and an empty middle seat. I never get upgrades, so this felt like quite the luxury to me. Turns out the rest of the plane was completely full, so I was feeling pretty good about this decision. However, I still had some work to do on my laptop and was disappointed that because there were no seats in front, I could not keep my backpack in front of me, and I realized I had to go fight the mob of people still boarding for some overhead bin space before they all filled up. There was a very nice businessman sitting in the aisle seat in my row who stood up to help me. This is relevant later. The overhead bins filled very quickly, at which point the flight attendant at the plane door started announcing, "Overhead bins are almost full, put your bags in the first one you see," to all the people still boarding the plane. Now here comes the last man to board the plane. He's probably about 6'3", and he runs in and kind of shoots the crap with one of the flight attendants for a few minutes, and I'm not paying too much attention besides hoping he's not going to take the middle seat and the fact that he is talking very loudly, and he seems to be a bit drunk. For the rest of the story, I will call this man Dirk, because I don't know what the male version of Karen is. Nobody is in any rush to start getting ready for takeoff, and we soon know why. The pilot gets on the loudspeaker and says that because of the weather in Boston, we need to wait here before we can take off. Now Dirk has stopped talking to the flight attendant and starts to walk down the aisle, sees our empty middle seat, and announces, "Cool, I'll take this first seat because it's empty." Throws his backpack down in the space in front of us and slams himself into the middle seat. Now, of course, I wouldn't have minded if someone had purchased the middle seat, but now I'm grumbling a bit internally, thinking about how I spent my airline credit on this upgrade instead of booze, while this guy is going to get the nice seat for free. And nobody immediately came up to him and asked him to move his backpack, so I'm also frustrated that I had to go put mine away, and now his bag is in front of my feet. And finally, Dirk is being extremely loud and vocal. For example, when the pilot came on the loudspeaker again and said we would be waiting 45 minutes before takeoff, Dirk yelled out, "Man, this is some bullcrap!" Stuff like that over and over. So at this point, I haven't said anything to him, but I'm sitting there probably looking like this. It's been about 5 minutes already, not too long, but I'm starting to think they're just going to let this fly. Then comes one of the flight attendants and walks up to this guy and says, "Sir, can I please see your boarding pass?" The man laughs a bit and says he just showed it at the gate, and the flight attendant repeats that he would like to see it. So the man starts rummaging through his backpack and hands the attendant some crumpled up paper and then goes back to his phone. The flight attendant uncrumples it and now starts to look annoyed and goes, "Sir, you just handed me a receipt. Try again." The man starts belly laughing like, "Oh, my bad," and then pulls his boarding pass from his pocket. Of course, he is in 32B, and the flight attendant asks him to go to his assigned seat. Now they start to fight, with Dirk saying, "But the guy said to take the first available seat. Nobody is sitting here anyway." And the attendant repeating that he didn't know how he heard that, but people need to pay to upgrade to these seats, and he needs to go to his assigned seat now. Things started to get heated, and Dirk is full-on screaming now, saying, "Why did he say to take the first available seat then? Why was he lying?" The attendant is yelling back, "This isn't Southwest!" And the rest of the plane is silent and watching. Now at this point, I'm guessing Dirk misinterpreted the guy at the door, saying to throw your bags in the first available overhead bin, but I did not want to get involved and have this potentially drunk man next to me direct his anger at me. Edit. The flight attendant announcing this was being very clear about this being for bags as well, so I think Dirk was just making up excuses. At this point, there are 3 flight attendants in the aisle arguing with Dirk, who is still scream-repeating the same thing about being lied to over and over. They are saying he needs to move or get kicked off the plane, and Dirk is replying that of course he would rather make it home to Boston tonight than get kicked off, but he needs an explanation first as to why they lied to him. In comes a boss of a lady who wasn't taking any of Dirk's crap to join the argument. She interrupts Dirk and says, "Look, you have 2 options. Take your assigned seat or get off the plane. I don't care what you think you heard. I don't know why we are still having this conversation." Then, when Dirk would open his mouth to continue arguing, the lady would hold up her hand and yell, "Ah, ah, ah," like a mother silencing their toddler having a tantrum, and I am sitting there 6 inches away from the action watching this all go down like this. Dirk sits there in silence for a few moments, mouth open, looking at this lady, and then stays sitting in the seat and looks back at his phone and starts mumbling again in a low voice about being lied to. At this point, the 3 flight attendants walk away, and Dirk seems to think that he's won, but lo and behold, 1 minute later, security comes on the plane. Now seeing this, Dirk stands straight up and says, "Okay, I will go take my seat," and starts to walk down the aisle, but they stop him and remove him from the plane, and we didn't see him again. And me and the nice man sitting in the aisle seat ended up getting free drinks for the rest of the flight for our troubles. In my opinion, this story is both entertaining and frustrating at the same time. It's interesting to see how entitled some people can be, and it's satisfying to see that the airline staff didn't back down and let the passenger have his way. However, it's also frustrating to see how some people feel like they deserve things that they haven't paid for and then throw a tantrum when they don't get their way. Overall, it's a good reminder to always follow the rules and treat others with respect, especially when traveling. The next one is an entitled people story.
My sister has just given birth about a month and a half ago, and I went over to help her with the baby and house chores since her husband couldn't take a leave from work. The problem is, my sister is an extremely outgoing person and loves going to places trying out new things. Me, on the other hand, I'm burnt out. And all I'm thinking about for an outing is how I'll be carrying the stroller across the long metro stairs, the baby needing a diaper change, and us running into the nearest toilet, the heavy traffic, the loud noises. In short, I see it as stress and a chore, not something I do out of enjoyment. For several days in a row now, I've been holed up in my room and refusing to go out with her while she goes alone. Today, she told me we will just go to the nearest park and that it's unhealthy for me to stay cooped up in the house all the time. I declined again, and she became upset and said she wasn't in the mood to go out anymore. She said why I was even over if all I wanted to do was stay home, that she was depressed, and I'm making her feel worse. I told her she can always go by herself and leave the baby with me, but she said that defeats the point of having company. She grumbled about no one caring about her and went into their bedroom and shut the door. I've been thinking maybe I should have just sucked it up and just go with her, but I don't know why she insists on me going out too when I said I'm exhausted. I don't know. Am I the a-hole? Comment said not the a-hole. People should really edit their post, as their comments have shown they are definitely helping out in plenty of other ways. So as per my original comment, it's wonderful that you offered to help, and you are clearly doing more than enough. Another comment said, not the a-hole. You're cleaning, cooking, and helping take care of the baby while struggling with your own mental health. Your sister sounds like an ungrateful brat. Most parents would kill to have someone take some of that work off their plate, not complain that you won't be their unpaid nanny during social excursions too. I'd go back home and dial your help down to cleaning, delivering meals once or twice a week. Her husband or someone else can step up for the rest.
The next story is titled Neighbor Karen Calls 911 on Firefighters Putting Out a Fire, Demands They Don't Park on Her Property. I had always dreamt of owning a house, and when I finally did, I was ecstatic. It was a beautiful house on the outskirts of town with a spacious yard, a stunning garden, and great neighbors, or so I thought. Little did I know that Karen, the lady who lived next door, was going to be a thorn in my side. When I first met her, I thought she was pleasant, but as days went by, she started showing her true colors. It all started when she asked me to borrow my lawnmower. Being the new neighbor, I didn't want to start things off on the wrong foot, so I obliged. Little did I know that it was going to be a mistake. The next day, Karen came banging on my door, accusing me of breaking her lawnmower. She wanted me to pay for the repairs, and when I declined, she started creating a scene. Things only got worse from there. Every time I did something she didn't like, she would find a way to complain. One day I had a small party at my house, and Karen showed up uninvited, complaining about the noise. We were just having dinner and playing board games, but she wouldn't hear it. She went as far as threatening to call the cops on us if we didn't stop making noise. Despite all of her complaints, I tried to be friendly and civil to Karen. But when the small kitchen fire happened, I realized that she had crossed a line. The fire department arrived promptly and put out the fire. As they were doing their job, Karen came running out of her house, screaming at the firefighters for parking in front of her property. The situation quickly escalated, and Karen called the police, claiming that the firefighters were parked illegally on her property. The police arrived and explained that the street was public property and that emergency vehicles were allowed to park anywhere. But Karen wouldn't hear it. She ended up attacking one of the firefighters. I was shocked to witness Karen attacking a firefighter right in front of a police officer. Her assault on a public servant was a felony, and from what I heard, she was sentenced to 2 years in prison. A month later, people came to take her belongings away, and her house went up for sale. Just when I thought that was the end of it, something else happened. The new owners of Karen's house turned out to be a group of rowdy teenagers. Every night they would throw parties that went on until the wee hours of the morning. They were loud and they didn't care about the neighborhood. It was as if Karen had passed her toxic legacy onto the next generation. It was a nightmare. I had just gotten over the trauma of having Karen as a neighbor, and now I had to deal with a whole new set of problems. I tried talking to the teenagers, but they didn't listen. I even called the cops, but they couldn't do much. Eventually, I had to take matters into my own hands. I spoke to some of the other neighbors, and we decided to organize a neighborhood watch. We took turns patrolling the streets at night and reporting any disturbances to the authorities. It was hard work, but it paid off. The teenagers eventually moved out, and a lovely family moved in. They had kids, and we often chatted and watched them play outside. It was a pleasant change from the constant tension that Karen and the rowdy teenagers brought to the neighborhood. The house was sold quickly, and the new owners seemed happy to have a fresh start in a peaceful neighborhood. As for me, I learned my lesson. I realized that I couldn't just sit back and hope that things would get better. I had to take action and work with my neighbors to make sure our community was a safe and peaceful place to live in. We started organizing block parties, potlucks, and other community events to strengthen our bonds and foster a sense of belonging. One day, while I was walking my dog, I noticed that Karen had been released from prison and had moved back to the neighborhood. I was apprehensive at first, but I didn't want to let her ruin the sense of community we had built. So I decided to give her a chance. To my surprise, Karen had changed. She was no longer the entitled and self-absorbed person she used to be. She had learned her lesson and was genuinely remorseful for her past behavior. She apologized to me and the other neighbors for her previous actions and thanked us for being patient with her. Karen even started attending our community events and actively participated in neighborhood activities. She even organized a fundraiser for the local fire department, which helped repair their equipment and buy new gear. It was a complete turnaround from the Karen I used to know. As time passed, Karen became an integral part of our community. She was loved and respected by everyone, and we all admired her for turning her life around. She had become an example of how people can change for the better. Years went by, and our neighborhood continued to thrive. People came and went, but the sense of community we had built remained. Eventually, I decided to sell my house and move to another city. It was a bittersweet moment for me, but I knew that the neighborhood was in good hands. As I drove away from the neighborhood, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the experience. Living next to Karen had been a challenging experience, but it had also taught me the importance of community and how people can change for the better. I knew that wherever I went, I would carry these lessons with me. Update. A few years later, I received an email from one of my old neighbors informing me that Karen had passed away. She had been battling cancer for a while, and it had finally caught up with her. I was saddened by the news, but I was also grateful for the time we had spent together as neighbors. The email went on to say that Karen had left behind a legacy in our community. Her efforts to repair the relationship she had with her neighbors had not gone unnoticed, and people remembered her fondly. To honor her memory, the neighborhood had decided to name a park after her, which would serve as a reminder of her transformation and the importance of community. I was touched by the gesture and felt proud to have been part of a community that recognized the power of forgiveness and second chances. Karen may have been a challenging neighbor, but she had also taught us that people can change, and it is never too late to make amends.
The next story is titled, Am I the A-hole for banning my niece from my house after she accused my daughter of stealing her AirPods? I live with my husband and our daughter Laura, who's 15. I have a niece, Kelly, who's 26. I'm quite close with my siblings and their children, but in recent years I haven't seen much of Kelly as she has moved to another city that's around 3 hours away. Kelly has been around more often with the holidays coming up, and a few days ago I hosted a family dinner and she came along. The next day, I get a phone call from Kelly. She's furious and tells me that Laura has apparently stolen her AirPods. I asked her what the heck she's talking about, and she said that she had had her AirPods in her handbag in our dining room, and that now her AirPods are gone. She said that Laura was acting suspicious and being guilty. I hadn't noticed anything, but there was a bit of unrelated drama going on at the dinner, so I was distracted. I told Kelly I'd talk to Laura, then call her back. I talked to Laura. She immediately denies stealing the AirPods. She said she's been nowhere near Kelly's handbag, and that it's not like she doesn't have her own headphones. I can usually tell when Laura is lying, and she's never stolen things in the past, so I'm pretty inclined to believe her. I know I'm biased because she's my daughter, but I do know her very well. I called Kelly back a few hours later and told her that I don't know what happened to them, but Laura has definitely not stolen her AirPods. Kelly insisted that Laura stole her AirPods and starts telling me that me and my husband must buy her a replacement. I told Kelly that that's just not the case, and I'm sure they'll turn up. Kelly even went around telling all our extended family that Laura stole her thing and that she's a liar and a thief, and I'm enabling it. The day after that, I get a text from Kelly telling me that she found her AirPods and that they were in the car the whole time. Kelly seemed to think it was really funny, but I told her that I really do not appreciate that she jumped straight to calling my daughter a thief when she misplaced her own AirPods. I told Kelly she's not welcome back into my home after the stunt she's pulled. Kelly got really upset and accused me of trying to cut her out of the family and being too harsh on her. Now my siblings are mad at me for banning Kelly from my house and said I'm being horrible and bullying her. Comment said, "Not the a-hole. Why would you welcome someone into your home who accused your daughter of stealing?" Turns her unfounded accusation into a full-blown family drama, only to find they had misplaced the item and treat it all as a joke. No thanks. You're just protecting your family from another incident. Another comment said, "Not the a-hole," until Kelly has called every person in the family, retracting her slander against your daughter, and makes a public post proclaiming your daughter's innocence. She can pound sand. I wouldn't trust her in your home for a very long time. The next story is titled, "Am I the a-hole for getting a 15-year-old kid and his dad arrested on felony charges?" Early February, my bike was stolen from a cafe in broad daylight. A friend told me they found my bike listed on Marketplace, and sure enough, there it was. They'd stripped the stickers, saddlebags, lights, basically anything that was easy to remove and identifiable. But I could still tell it was mine. I messaged them asking if they still have it and say yes. We agree to meet up at a truck stop with the friend who tipped me off about the listing to look at the bike. I ask her about it. She has no idea about anything about the bike, claiming she's selling it for her son. After a few minutes of stringing her along and pretending to inspect the bike, I say, "Oh yes, this is the bike that your son stole from the restaurant. I'll be taking it back now." She claims that we're robbing her, tries to create a scene, and then my friend calls the cops for real. Cops arrive, question both parties, but she avoids responsibility by feigning ignorance, although the son is arrested for grand larceny. 2 days later, the kid's father calls me. My number was listed publicly on my Facebook, and tries to talk me into dropping the charges or because this would ruin his life, and kids make mistakes. I tell him that the situation is no longer in my control. Lie. And then tries to convince me to put in a good word for his son in hopes for leniency. I shut him down immediately, and he proceeds to get angry, yell at me for a bit, and threaten me if I don't do as he asks, oblivious to the fact that the conversation is recorded. I turn the recording over to the police. Dad is arrested for intimidating a witness. The next day, the mother calls me from a blocked number and tries to talk to me, but as soon as she identifies herself, I tell her to duck off and not call me again, or I'll be reporting her to the police as well, and she hangs up. She then contacts my wife via Facebook, sending a massive wall of texts claiming that I've ruined her son's life over nothing, and how her and her children were going to be out on the street because they relied on their husband's income. My wife is now upset and thinks I took the situation too far, as do most people I've told this about. But I disagree. I don't think my actions were unreasonable. This isn't a little kid making a mistake because they don't know the difference between right and wrong. This is a teenager that stole something because he's a little bastard, and a family that not only didn't make the kid do the right thing, but willfully participated in concealing and trying to profit off their child's criminal behavior. They're crappy people, and I don't feel any remorse for giving crappy people what they deserve. Update. I did not expect to receive 3,000 comments. I can't really read or reply to them all. To try to answer some general things I've seen repeatedly. I called PD today, and they said I couldn't drop the charges even if I wanted to. So there's that. I'm not very familiar with or fond of the legal system or the police, which is part of why I tried to avoid involving them in the first place. Take your number off of Facebook. My Facebook is associated with my business. They got the number from that page, not my actual profile. Never had an issue until now, and I don't plan to change anything based on the actions of some random sociopaths. You shouldn't have set up a half-assed sting operation. It's illegal to record a phone call. It was a good sting operation, but besides that, my local police are notorious for not giving a duck about property crime. I mean, sure, I should have reported to them, I guess, or I could not have, to cross my fingers and pray the cops actually did something, and avoid the hassle of thieves selling it, getting locked in evidence. I also live in a one-party consent state, so as soon as I figured out who it was, I recorded the call because I thought it was strange that this man dug up my contact info and called me. Grand larceny for a bike, $2,500 bike. $500 is a cutoff in my state that separates misdemeanors from a felony. You have thousands to drop on a bike, ivory tower ruining their lives over a bike, blah, blah, blah. If you think that being able to save $2,500 for a hobby means you're so rich that you can afford to let people steal your stuff, I don't even know. If you smoke cigarettes, drink beer, smoke weed, or eat out regularly, you are most likely spending $2,500 a year in discretionary income. In regards to ruining their lives, I didn't intend to involve the police in the first place. But after the mother started a scene which attracted the attention of onlookers that lost interest upon realizing what was happening, my friend called the police out of fear. If he didn't, we'd be suspected of being thieves ourselves. But for all of those who are chastising me for being pissed off about having my bike stolen, I hope you can maintain this saintly attitude if and when you're in the same situation, and not when it's your $2,500 investment in the center of your hobby that's been stolen. Insert race class baiting here. The family are white, lower middle class sorts. But since so many people are hung up on race, I guess I'll give you my 2 cents. Growing up as a half Mexican kid that passes for full Mexican, if I've got a tan in a hillbilly town in Texas, my parents taught me not to break the law because the police are racist. Also, in regards to stealing to survive, being poor is a valid excuse to rob people. I don't care to discuss this either. Reporting the dad shows that you're trying to be vindictive. I didn't report him to be an a-hole. I reported him because he called me and threatened me after he realized that negotiating wasn't an option. I'd rather not play stupid games with idiots and end up having a shootout at OK Corral. Thanks. You should report the mom. Why didn't she get arrested? I don't care to do so. Even if I did, she didn't make threats. Just sent a wall of text guilt trip. So I'm not sure if it would have even been an offense. I can only assume she didn't get arrested due to some combination of the fact that she cooperated and indifference on the part of the police. Being a middle-aged, middle-class-looking white lady probably had something to do with it. She feigned ignorance, claimed to not realize anything was suspicious. I suppose that's possible as the bike is very plain, and I could see how someone not in the know about cycling wouldn't be able to pick it out. But the whole context of the situation makes it difficult for me to believe she legitimately had no clue what was going on. How did you know it was yours? Not a common bike, and there were still aftermarket components left on the core of the bike that hadn't been messed with. ComEd said not the a-hole. If they are innocent, it will come out in the investigation. Those that are guilty will get what they deserve. They've ruined their own lives. Another comment said, not sure if this comment will be downvoted to oblivion, but anyways, here goes. This serves more like a rant than a judgment. I'm not American, and I'm not sure if this happens in the U.S., but I assume it is. That being said, I find it amusing how people unanimously agree that the prison in U.S. is ducked up, beyond repair, yet when things like this happen, they are more than happy to send people on their merry way to the ducked up prison. That kid and their family are thieves and liars. That is true as well. But I didn't know, man. Is there no middle ground between getting your bike back safely and condemning a whole family to homelessness and destitution? Not the a-hole, but things could be better. The last story is titled, Am I the a-hole for threatening to kick my dad out of my wedding because he kept apologizing to his fiancée whose birthday it was? My dad has been with Marissa for about 2 years, and they just got engaged. I don't have much of a relationship with her, as she isn't a pleasant person. I don't know Marissa's birthday and don't see why I should be expected to, but my wedding ended up falling on her birthday. When my dad found out the date, I could tell he was stressed. He said she has a lot of trauma, and he feels so guilty spending her birthday at my wedding. I didn't say much, and I figured they could work it out. Well, the wedding was last weekend. I'm not sure if Marissa was upset or not. She is very stoic, so I didn't know. But my dad kept apologizing when they first arrived, and he came to see me in the bridal room. He brought her for some reason, and as they walked in, I could hear him saying sorry and asking if she was okay. Right before the ceremony, he had her on his lap and was whispering, but I could hear it. He was saying he wished she could open her birthday presents, and she was like, I just don't want to do it today. Then he said, what if she opens them and he buys new ones for the day they celebrate? Then my grandma comes over and tried to give her a gift, and he was just so annoying about it. Final straw was during the reception. Marissa was complaining to my grandma how she hates chocolate cake, the only cake we had, and my dad took her in his arms and was asking if she wanted to go out later and get something, and again apologized. I finally snapped and yelled at him, if my wedding was such a burden, take the child he is dating and get the duck out. I meant it because of her actions, and there isn't a big age gap. He looked horrified, and I was like, well, go. My grandma immediately began to berate me that I'm awful, and he paid for the wedding. He asked if I really wanted him to go, and I told him to either shut the duck up about her birthday or go. He stayed, but was cold the rest of the night, and I heard Marissa and my grandma joking about she should rip up the check he gave me for how I spoke to him. I don't know if I overreacted, as he was just having empathy for his fiancée. Comment said, not the a-hole. I think those giving you the a-hole comments need to look at the fact that OP could hear her apologizing every time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you do not bring your family problems into public, especially during a wedding. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.